7 miles above a Croatian village, in a sky so clear you could see for 100 miles, two airliners flew into the same point in space at the very same second. There was no fog to blame, no storm, no mountain hidden in cloud. Nothing was concealed from anyone that morning. And yet 176 people fell out of a spotless sky. The stranger question is not how it happened. It is why, when the investigation ended, only a single man was sent to prison for it, and why dozens of his own colleagues signed their names to a document begging to be jailed beside him. The date was the 10th of September, 1976. High over the flat farmland northeast of Zagreb, a British Airways Hawker Siddeley Trident was tracking southeast, carrying passengers from London toward Istanbul. Climbing up to meet it, though neither crew knew it, was a DC-9 belonging to the Yugoslav airline Inex-Adria DC-9, full of holidaymakers heading home to West Germany. One aircraft was cruising level. The other was still reaching for altitude. Somewhere in between, their two flight paths were about to intersect at a single, fatal point. Zagreb in 1976 was one of the busiest pieces of sky in Europe. It sat astride the great corridor that funneled traffic between Western Europe and the Middle East, a junction where dozens of airliners passed every hour. All of that traffic had to be sorted, stacked, and separated by the controllers on the ground at Zagreb Area Control Center. And on that September morning, in the sector that mattered most, the crowded upper airspace, that work had fallen very largely onto the shoulders of one man. His name was Gradimir Tasić. He was an experienced controller, and by every account a capable one. But the position he occupied that day was never meant to be held by a single person. The upper sector was supposed to be run by a team, one controller to talk to the aircraft, others to plan ahead, to coordinate handoffs, to catch the mistakes that a tired human eye inevitably misses. That morning the team had thinned to almost nothing. Tasić was, in effect, doing the work of several men at once, tracking a sky full of aircraft with his voice, his memory, and a radar display that told him far less than a modern one would. Picture the room he worked in, a darkened control hall, the green glow of the radar, the constant murmur of pilots' voices in his headset, each demanding a decision. Climb this one, turn that one, hand this one across to the next sector. On a properly staffed watch, the pressure is shared. That morning, it was concentrated. Every aircraft in the upper sector was, ultimately, Tasić's problem to solve, and the aircraft did not stop coming just because the team was short. Aboard the DC-9 were families, parents and children returning from holidays on the Adriatic coast. Ordinary people who had no reason to think about the invisible architecture of clearances and altitudes that was keeping them alive. Aboard the Trident were passengers bound for Istanbul, trusting, as we all do, that somewhere on the ground a professional held the whole picture. That morning, no single person held the whole picture, because the whole picture had grown too large for one mind to carry. Into that overloaded scene climbed the Inex-Adria DC-9. Its crew called for permission to climb higher, up through the busy upper levels. And here is where the disaster took its shape. To grant that climb was to send the DC-9 up through the exact altitude where the British Airways Trident was cruising, almost at right angles to its path. The margin between order and catastrophe had narrowed to a few words, a few seconds, and one man's ability to hold an impossible amount of information in his head at once. For years, the story most people were told was simple. The controller made a mistake. He let two aircraft occupy the same altitude, they collided, and everyone aboard died. Case closed. But the transcripts and the working conditions told a different, far more uncomfortable story. One that pointed not at a single careless man, but at a system that had been quietly set up to fail, and that had simply run out of luck on the 10th of September. Handoffs, the moments when an aircraft is passed from one controller's frequency to the next, are among the most delicate in the business. Each one is a break in continuity, a place where a detail can slip through the cracks. On a smooth day, they are routine. On an overloaded one, with a thinned-out team and too many aircraft calling at once, they become a series of small gambles, and the odds compound with every transmission. In the final moments, as the situation unraveled, the exchanges between the ground and the climbing DC-9 slipped out of English, the international language of aviation, and into Serbo-Croatian, the controller's own tongue. It was a small thing and an entirely human one. Under pressure, a man reaches for the language he thinks fastest in. But it meant that the other crews in the sky, listening on the frequency, the ones who might have understood the danger unfolding, could no longer follow what was being said. The shared awareness that keeps aircraft apart had quietly gone dark. At around 11:10 that morning, the two aircraft met. The DC-9, still climbing, and the Trident, holding its level, came together 7 miles above the village. There was no time to react, no warning that could have helped. In an instant, both aircraft were torn apart, and wreckage rained down over the fields and rooftops below. 176 people, everyone aboard both flights, were killed. It remains one of the deadliest mid-air collisions in the history of aviation. For the people of the village below, the disaster arrived with no warning at all. One moment, there was the distant drone of high aircraft. The next, wreckage and bodies were falling into gardens and fields on a quiet late summer day. What had been settled far overhead in a matter of seconds now lay scattered across the countryside, to be gathered piece by piece. On the ground, the recorders and the radar logs preserved the final minutes in cold detail. The clearances, the readbacks, the instant the two blips merged into one and then vanished. Everything a court would need was there. The trouble was that the tape recorded what one man had said and done. It could not so easily record the empty chairs beside him. When the investigators and then the prosecutors came, they needed an answer the public could understand. And a system is a difficult thing to put on trial. You cannot handcuff understaffing. You cannot imprison an inadequate radar, or a chronic shortage of qualified controllers, or the political decisions that had left one of Europe's busiest sectors dangerously thin. But you can put a man in a courtroom. And so they did. Gradimir Tasić was charged, tried and convicted for the collision, and sentenced to years in prison. The failures around him, the missing colleagues, the crushing workload, the tangled frequencies and handoffs that no single human could have managed cleanly, were noted, discussed, and then left largely unpunished. The verdict drew a neat circle around one exhausted man and called the matter solved. For Tasić himself, the change was brutal and swift. In the space of a single shift, he had gone from respected professional to the man an entire country needed to blame. He did not deny his part in what had happened, but he had never been given the tools, the colleagues, or the hours of rest that his job required, and now he alone would answer for the gap between what was demanded of him and what was humanly possible. But the men and women who did the same job every day knew exactly what had happened because they lived it. They understood that on another day, in another sector, it could have been any of them at that radar screen, carrying the load of an absent team. His own colleagues signed a petition, an extraordinary document in which they argued that if Tasić was guilty, then so were all of them, and asked to share his punishment. They were not excusing the deaths. They were refusing to let one man be turned into a scapegoat for a system's sins. The international body that represented air traffic controllers took up his cause, and the story traveled far beyond Yugoslavia. Here was a profession recognizing itself in one man's fate. If a controller could be jailed for the consequences of an understaffing he did not create, then the job itself was on trial. And every controller everywhere had a stake in the verdict. The pressure worked. After serving only part of his sentence, a little over 2 years, Gradimir Tasić was pardoned and released. He walked out not fully cleared, but no longer the sole prisoner of a catastrophe that had 100 authors. His case became a landmark, cited for decades afterward whenever controllers argued that punishing the individual at the sharp end does nothing to fix the conditions that put him there. That is the real lesson buried in the Zagreb collision, and it answers the question we began with. Nothing was hidden in that clear September sky because the true cause was never in the sky at all. It lay on the ground, in the staffing rosters and the budgets and the quiet assumption that one skilled man could indefinitely do the work of many. The mistake that killed 176 people was made long before Tasić ever keyed his microphone. It is a pattern that repeats across every field where human beings hold the line against disaster. When something goes wrong, it is far easier and far more satisfying to find the one person whose hand was on the controls than to confront the slow, expensive, unglamorous work of fixing the machine around them. Tasić was not the machine. He was the last exhausted safeguard in a machine that had already broken. In the years that followed, safety experts gave the idea a name, a just culture, one that separates honest human error from genuine negligence and treats a mistake as a symptom to be understood rather than a crime to be avenged. The thinking is not soft, it is ruthlessly practical. If the people at the sharp end fear prison for every error, they hide their mistakes and the system learns nothing, and the next collision comes anyway. Zagreb became one of the cases that forced that argument into the open, and somewhere in the transcripts of that morning, in the instant his voice slipped into his mother tongue, you can still hear a man who was simply, hopelessly, alone. Tasić served his sentence, but the sky he guarded was never truly his to hold alone. How many other disasters blamed the one hand on the controls? Watch the next story on screen now.